with Donald Trump will air tomorrow night. One person tonight has been shot and killed during the clashes between the protesters and the police. It was a civilian-on-civilian violence after several gunshots rang out in the middle of all this chaos. Now, police say the victim was in fact shot and killed by another civilian. This second night of violent unrest stemming from the shooting of a 43-year-old black man who police say was armed and obeying orders. The victim's family is claiming that he was only holding a book. Police held a press conference early today, and they tried to make the facts of the investigation open to the public. And despite all of this, we are seeing this intense unrest tonight after 16 officers were injured last night. On the ground tonight in Charlotte is our own Steve Harrigan. Steve, I've been watching. You've got tear gas, you got rubber bullets, and you said now mace is being used as the police now try and hold that line.
That's right, Sean. You can see this line of police here right behind me, about 100 strong. They've been out here for more than an hour. Right now, they've pushed the crowd back after a heavy use of tear gas and mace as well. They're being cursed at from the sidewalk by people. They've had bottles hurled at them and fireworks shot at them. At least 7 officers have been injured. We don't know about the severity. And throughout this demonstration, which has now lasted more than an hour and a half, at least one young man, African-American man, one of the protesters, was killed. The city of Charlotte is saying it was civilian-on-civilian shooting. That doesn't mean much to these protesters who seem convinced that it was yet another police shooting. So really we're seeing again here in this case in Charlotte 2 different versions of what happened. An official version and a version believed by many of the protesters. When that shot rang out, we just saw them run down this hill right here saying they shot another one, the police shot another one. So really some white-hot anger here on the streets. The people we've talked to sometimes would try and grab the microphone out of your hands, just furious and not believing that we're going to give them a fair shake to say what they want to say. Police.
What are they saying there, Steve?
We've been given an order to disperse. We're going to obey that order to avoid arrest, and we're going to see what happens to the people who refuse that order. We've heard that order several times, and it has failed several times. The police have pushed forward with tear gas. Over the course of 90 minutes, they've been able to move just about 100 yards. So they have not had great success against the protesters so far, who, despite the fact that one man has been killed, one man injured, keep regathering after each round of tear gas. So we're going to see if this group of, not a very large group of police for the violence that we've seen here, is going to be able to take control of this street and begin to make arrests, Sean.
Steve, what is that guy in blue screaming at you?
He's swearing at the police.
Okay.
He's cursing them out. We've seen them throw bottles of beer at the police, and now we're seeing the first arrests of the few people who remain out here. We're going to keep backing up because they've included media as well in that. And
yep, there's a conflict now breaking out there.
We've seen some looting as well here, some looting of the hotel and some looting of a store here off to my left. Right now, the street is empty. We've seen this come and go, build and empty. We can take a look here at this souvenir stand. You can see this is one of the casualties. Some vehicles also smashed and looted as well. We actually saw protesters shouting at some of the people who were looting here, calling them idiots for ruining what they were trying to do here with their protest. But obviously, a number of different groups among these 800 protesters. It began around 7 o'clock, and we saw a lot of families, mothers, fathers, young children, out for the march, out to see what was going on, to take part in perhaps a historical event. And like it did last night, it turned ugly again tonight. It's turned into a pitched battle, and a battle that the police have not been able to gain control of as of yet. For the past 90 minutes, they've gone back and forth.
And Steve, just to be clear, you're saying we had 16 officers injured last night, thankfully not seriously. You're saying reports of at least 7 injured tonight, and tear gas, as I saw you reporting earlier tonight, you could feel it in the back of your throat, rubber bullets, and you said mace was being fired at the crowd as well tonight.
That's right. A whole string of non-lethal force we've seen used. We've seen tear gas on multiple occasions. We've seen mace come out in a spray. We've seen flashbang grenades really to stun the crowd, a large flash and a loud explosion. Now the police are using their batons and beating on their shields and marching down the street. Right now, just a few protesters in front of them, a handful of 6 or 10 hardcore. The crowd has gone anywhere from a dozen to about 800 at its peak. And now just the hardcore remain, as the police right now are unopposed, but that could change when the crowd regathers, as we've seen time and time again, Sean.
Let me go to the two different versions, Steve, that have emerged in this particular case. Very starkly different versions have emerged. Police very adamant in saying that Keith Lamont Scott disregarded repeated demands to drop his gun. A gun was found at the scene. Also, a holster apparently was on his ankle. Neighborhood residents are saying he was holding a book, not a weapon, as he waited for his son to get off a school bus. The police chief was adamant today in saying that the evidence would prove this, but then there's the issue of why, in fact, they didn't release a video that apparently they have available. They're saying it's because it's an ongoing investigation.
You're right. They haven't released that video yet because of the investigation. And you're right also to point out that these two versions of what happened could not be any more different. On the one, it's the portrayal of a loving father reading in his car, waiting for his son at the bus stop. On the other, it's a multiple convicted felon with a gun, threatening police, an imminent threat to their lives. So really, two extreme versions. And we're seeing the different versions play out here again tonight. On the one hand, protesters saying the police shot another young black man here. On the other hand, the city's saying it was civilian on civilian doing the shooting. So two different versions, but I can tell you it's clear from being in this crowd that the protesters do not believe the official version. They do not believe what the city of Charlotte is saying. They do not believe what the mainstream media is saying. They believe that the police shot another man, and we're going to see how that plays out in the days ahead, Sean.
All right, Steve Harrigan, stay right there. We'll be checking in with you throughout the hour, and also any people that you'll be interviewing there. Joining us now is former Speaker of the House, Newt Gingrich, is with us. Mr. Speaker, unfortunately, sadly, we have seen this time and time again now in Ferguson and Baltimore, and it keeps happening. And you've got these two very distinct versions of what happened here, and nobody seems to want to wait for a full, complete investigation. We've had issues involving even the president with the Cambridge police and the Trayvon Martin case. And in what happened in Ferguson, Missouri, rushing to judgment. The president and Hillary Clinton have embraced Black Lives Matter. Black Lives Matter activists on tape saying, what do we want? Dead cops. When do we want it now? Pigs in a blanket. Fry it like bacon. Are they contributing to this atmosphere that everybody rushes to judgment against the police before facts are in?
Well, I mean, it's an objective fact that we are in the last months of an 8-year presidency of the first African-American president in American history, that we've had 8 straight years of an African-American attorney general, and that their rhetoric and their approach and their attitude has made these things worse, not better. I mean, that's an objective fact. But I think there are two really big truths here that are bigger than any one city or any one incident. One is that no healthy society can tolerate this kind of demonstration and violence when it involves looting, when it involves breaking the law. And so you have to ultimately apply whatever level of police power is necessary, including in some cases the National Guard, in order to ensure that you don't tolerate that kind of thing. But there's a second half, and this is the deeper part of the anger that you see with some of the young people that are out there. No healthy society can trap hundreds of thousands, maybe several million people in neighborhoods where the schools don't work, there are no jobs, there is no public safety, there is no sense of hope, where despair is the norm, and where people feel totally abandoned. And I think that's a big part of what you're seeing. And you see it again and again across the country. It's one reason that I'm very encouraged that Donald Trump has got the courage to go into neighborhoods that people normally don't get somebody on the Republican side and say to them, look, we've got to try something new and something different. And I think that's a big part of this. The people you're watching who are yelling and who are angry, They're angry for deep reasons that don't have anything to do with any particular shooting. They feel that they have no future. They feel that they have no opportunity. They feel that they've been neglected. And as I said, after 8 years of the first African-American president, as one of them said, they feel powerless and voiceless. Now, I mean, what a tragic moment in that context.
You know, Mr. Speaker, you're talking about the real root cause of why there is so much anger out there in the country. I often give statistics. Earlier today, I spent an hour with Donald Trump in a town hall in a predominantly African-American church, part of the continued outreach that you referred to. And at the start of the program, which we hope we can air tomorrow night, I gave out a lot of statistics about what has happened in the last 8 years. 8 years, particularly the disproportionate impact on the black community. A 58% increase in the number of African Americans on food stamps. A 20% jump in the number of African Americans who are no longer in the workforce. The African American home ownership rate is down. It's more than 20% lower than the national average. African American unemployment, 8.1%. The national average is 4.9%. The wage gap between African Americans and white workers is the worst in nearly 40 years. Median household income for African Americans is $20,000 less than the national average. The African American poverty rate is 24.1%, 10% higher than the national average. You know, then we look at, crime problems. You know, there have been this year alone in the city of Chicago, Obama's hometown, 3,100 people have been shot. And since Obama's been president, 3,660 people have been murdered. The vast majority African American. And I look at these statistics. I guarantee you most of our audience doesn't know the name of one single person of the 3,660, but they know about Trayvon Martin, and they know about Ferguson, and they know about Freddie Gray, and they know about the Cambridge police. Why isn't the president, why do we not pay attention to an epidemic when the statistics also show that 99.9% of cops do not treat people this way?
Well, look, I mean, here's the tragic secret of what's gone wrong with inner-city African-American life, and for that matter, inner-city Latino life in this country, and that is the people who supposedly cared the most about them, the liberal politicians who got elected, many of them from their own ethnic background, are basically owned by institutions that don't work. So you go into a place like Detroit where 9% of the students are learning. You go into Baltimore where 13% of the 8th graders are able to actually pass a math test. And the 9%, by the way, is a reference to literacy, I think, in the 3rd grade. But you go around place after place. If you tried to actually go in there and create real improvement, you run head-on into the teachers union, which is against you. If you go in and you try to create the kind of policing that Rudy Giuliani and Chief Bratton used, which brought down the murder rate by 85%, you run into liberals who would rather see people killed than have the kind of aggressive policing that made New York safe. That's a big part of it. Trump.
Well, I mean, the murder rate went in New York City, and I lived here as it happened, from about 2,500 a year to below 500 a year. And a lot of the people whose lives were saved because of policing in neighborhoods that needed it the most were minority Americans. And you're right, there was a lot of criticism. Rudy took a lot of heat, was called racist day in and day out by local newspapers and the liberal media, but lives were saved.
So what you have to really recognize is, I think, two things. First, and I think conservatives find this difficult to really deal with. It is harder to be black in America. Slavery was real. In fact, I think it's a terrific thing that the Smithsonian is opening this new museum of African American history, because I hope it'll bring home to a lot of Americans. Slavery was real and terrible. Segregation was real and terrible. Discrimination still exists. So if you're that one young black lady we saw in the last hour who was so angry, could barely articulate because she was so emotional and so fed up, you have to understand that her experience of life is different. Now, the other side of that is, how are we going to turn that corner so her life could be dramatically better? And that's going to require real willingness to go into these communities and have very profound changes.
We have two very distinct, different stories that have emerged here, and that is the community believes one thing, that this man was carrying a book. The police are saying, no, that's not what happened here, and we're talking about Keith Lamont Scott. And the police are saying, no, he had a gun. Yes, he had on his ankle a holster. So you have two very different stories. Now, I want to go back. If we look at these prior incidences, and I don't care if it's the Cambridge police or Trayvon Martin or Ferguson, you know, it was hands up, don't shoot in Ferguson, but then it was black eyewitnesses that testified that it was Michael Brown, after he robbed a store, fighting a police officer, Darren Wilson, for his gun, then charged at the officer. And because of the testimony of black eyewitnesses, in fact, he was exonerated. He was not charged. In the case of Freddie Gray, everybody had an expectation, after listening to the local prosecutor and DA, that there was going to be guilty verdicts in those cases. All 6 officers were found innocent. There was an expectation that George Zimmerman would be found guilty. But you had an eyewitness that placed Trayvon Martin on top of George Zimmerman, who we heard screaming for his life, and was grounding and pounding his head into the cement, into concrete. So my question is, the leaders, the president in this case, or Hillary Clinton, both of whom have embraced Black Lives Matter, a group that has said, what do we want? Dead cops, what do we want them now? What responsibility do they bear in terms of these high-profile incidents, all while ignoring the violence and the statistics, the 3,660 dead, over 75% black Americans in Chicago since he's been president?
Well, look, I mean, obviously they bear a substantial responsibility for setting a tone. I mean, things are worse today. People are more angry today. They are more likely to disbelieve the police today. That's a large part of Barack Obama's contribution. In Hillary's case, all the way back to when she was a student at Yale, she was the associate editor of a radical newspaper which described police as pigs. She left Yale to go to the West Coast to work with a law firm which specialized in defending the Black Panthers. She recently, as recently as today, came out with one more anti-police statement. So in that sense, they deserve a great deal of responsibility. But let me remind you of something, Sean, that may make you a little uncomfortable. You and I don't believe John Kerry about virtually anything. We don't believe the president's White House about virtually anything. In a way, the collapse of belief in American institutions isn't just inner city blacks. It is that the establishment has lied so much on so many different topics, and the news media has lied so much on so many different topics, that reestablishing a sense of trust, rebuilding a belief that when the government talks is telling you the truth, this is going to be a big mountain for Donald Trump to climb, because we start with this notion that white conservatives don't believe A, B, and C, and black inner city folks don't believe D, E, and F. And so the whole system is shaky right now in a way that's, I think, very dangerous.
That's really well said. And polls bear that out about trust in the media. Look at the exit polls in every primary. 65% of Republicans feel betrayed by their party. But, Mr. Speaker, stay right there. I want to get back to that, and we'll get back to you in just a moment. But first, Jonathan Serry has some breaking news. He's on the ground. He's in Charlotte right now. Jonathan.
Hi, Sean. Police wanted to correct the record earlier this evening. They had reported that there had been a shooting, apparently involving a civilian on another civilian, reporting that one person had died in that shooting. They're now saying that the victim is still alive, but on life support, hanging on by a thread. So they wanted to get that information out, correcting the record. Again, this was not the shooting that happened tonight out here at the protest did not involve a police officer. Apparently, it was civilian on civilian violence. And because the protests here are turning violence, not just protesters turning on each other in the case of this shooting, apparently, but also turning on police officers. And so about 2 blocks from where I'm standing, there's a line of officers in riot gear. They are trying to clear people out of the area. The police chief says that authorities here have been very patient, and the protests started out peaceful, but then once they got violent, his main concern now is protecting everyone, regardless of what side the story they're on, what side of the story they believe. His responsibility is to all of the citizens and visitors here in Charlotte, and so authorities are trying to get people out of this area, get the protesters out, and prevent any more violence. Now, while there is this report of this very serious injured civilian-on-civilian case involving a shooting, they say that no police officers have been injured tonight. And that's a big difference from yesterday when at least 16 officers suffered injuries during protests turned violent, Sean.
All right, well, that's really important because we had reports earlier that 7 officers were injured tonight, 16 last night, and also we had the police chief was actually on the air in the last hour with Megan, and he had confirmed that this person was civilian-on-civilian violence. That part of the story remains the same, but the only thing that has changed, he did not die. He is, in fact, on life support and in our prayers, of course. Thank you so much, Jonathan Serrie. We go back to Steve Harrigan, who's also on the ground and giving us an update. We've got 2 different shots there. It looks like police, I don't know if it's an outreach, they actually seem to be smiling and somewhat talking to some of the people there. You were calling them the stragglers earlier. Steve, where are you now?
That's right. As the police begin to move forward and pound their batons against those riot shields again with their plexiglass helmets, they're marching forward slowly and steadily to try and take control of the street. We've seen really a pitched battle for the last 2 hours between demonstrators and police, and now with this march and with several volleys of tear gas, the police have largely scattered the protesters. If we look about 300 or 400 yards down the road, though, there's still about 200, 300 protesters there, so the test is going to be when these two sides meet again. Over and over again, we've seen the protesters rally, hurl bottles at police, and then retreat under the threat of tear gas. So the police are marching forward, trying to take control of downtown Charlotte, and we're going to see in just a few minutes whether the protesters let that happen or not, Sean.
I see the distance. I see the police now moving in, and I know you've spoken with some of the protesters earlier. You're now moving in their direction, moving down towards them. Are any of them expressing any? I mean, is there just total doubt of everything that the police said? I mean, I know they haven't released the video. An investigation is ongoing. I understand all of that, but they either found the gun or they didn't find a gun. They either found a book or they didn't find a book. It seems pretty cut and dry whichever way this story is going to break. The police say it was a gun. They say they had a holster, and there was a picture of it. And the community is saying, no, it was a book, and he wasn't doing a thing. So I would think that there'd be some clarification to get that information out to the public. That hasn't happened.
No, it hasn't happened, and really the focus here now is on more immediate things like who shot the young man here who's on life support clinging to life. Was it a police officer, as many of the protesters say, or was it civilian-on-civilian shooting, as the city of Charlotte says? So really a whole nother case has got their attention, and really it's not about reasoned debate right here on the street. It's about emotion. You have people who are really in a fury and who are throwing things at the police officers of their city. We have at least 6 police officers wounded again tonight, so it's an angry fight right now. Right now it's quiet, but we could see a standoff over the next hour as these two sides get closer together again.
And you're saying that, from what I can see, if we can pan your camera over to the other side, we got the police, we got our shot on the police right now. If they can now turn the other direction towards the crowd, because what you're saying is that they sort of have regathered, and they're now about 300 of them, where earlier you said it was reduced to a dozen, and they keep regrouping. So how many people would you your estimate of how many people are now standing on the other side of the police with this huge gap between them, if you can show us the crowd of protesters?
Sure, I'll ask Chris Pontius to turn around and show you some of those protesters. You can see a lot of them have their shirts off or other things wrapped around their noses or mouths to try and protect them from the tear gas, and it looks very small. This is a very fluid situation where the numbers come and go. As it's gotten later, the crowd has gotten smaller. I'd say right about now, about 80 protesters. At its height, we saw about 800.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks so much for being with us, Steve Harrigan on the ground. We'll get back to you throughout the hour tonight. Joining us now on the phone, watching all of this, former New York City Mayor Rudy Giuliani. Mr. Mayor, thanks for being with us.
Thank you very much.
We did a town hall today in Cleveland.
I saw it.
And we did it with Donald Trump, and one of the things that came up was this whole issue of how to handle crime in big cities. We now have seen this in Ferguson. We have seen this in Baltimore. We have seen this elsewhere around the country.
It breaks my heart.
And I guess it breaks my heart, too, because it's so unnecessary.
To see this breaks my heart, and it makes me feel like my eight years of work as mayor of New York City went for naught. I took over a city that had two major riots, much like this, in the 4 years before I was mayor. And I had 8 years without riot because I would not permit a riot. I had 3 major shootings. One was a justified shooting, one was an ambiguous shooting, and one was a totally unjustified shooting, and the police officer is sitting in jail for 25 years. And this comes from a lack of leadership. This comes from the fact that the African-American community has been fed a false narrative from the very top, including the President of the United States, 2 attorneys general, the Secretary of State, who found the police officers in Baltimore guilty after they were found not guilty by an African-American judge that they had, and never apologized for it. So they are being fed a group of lies. And, the truth is the only thing that will set you free, not a series of lies. And in a situation like this, the people have to have confidence enough in their leadership, even if they don't like them, even if they disrespect them. They have to have enough confidence in them to believe that there will be a fair and just adjudication.
Mr. Mayor, there's these conflicting stories. Now, either this individual had, in fact, Keith Lamont Scott had a gun, had a holster, where there's pictures of, as the police are saying, or he was holding a book, which the police say there was no book. So there doesn't seem to be any gray area here. It was either one or the other.
There is not. It's either one or the other. And what the President of the United States, I will say, what Governor McCrory and the mayor in that city should be saying to people is, wait, let us investigate this. If you don't like the result, you can protest. But I got to tell you one thing, you don't get to throw rocks, you don't get to shoot, you don't get to loot. None of that happens under any circumstances.
How would you be handling this differently?
Even if it's an unjustified shooting, you do not get to destroy the property of some other African-American man who has a woman who has a business in that area. This is absurd, what we have happen here. We have gone back 8 to 10 years in our race relationships because of what Barack Obama and Eric Holder and the President Attorney General and Hillary Clinton have done, which is they jump on immediately on these incidents and try to politicize them. And if, in fact, this man walked out of the car with a gun, of course the police officer is going to shoot him. You would shoot him. Now, you're not going to wait until the man pulls his gun up and shoots you. It might be too late to shoot him. If the man didn't have a gun, then the police officer belongs in jail. And
it's really that simple. It's really that cut and dry. Well, what would you look? We've watched now 2 nights in a row here, and now you can see that the crowd is growing and getting a little bigger once again. Police have used tear gas, rubber bullets, mace, and flashbang grenades. And my question to you is, if this was your city and you saw this happen last night, what would you be doing differently?
It wouldn't happen in my city.
How would it not happen?
I set the rules down on day one. I mean, I gave a speech and a talk, and I met with the leaders, and I said, you get to protest all you want, but you take my streets, I arrest you. You throw a rock, I put you in jail. You shoot a gun, we're going to shoot back. I have 41,000 police. I don't know how many you have, but you're not going to riot in my city. Cities
and it
in
didn't
America,
happen.
In an American civilized society, there's no place for rioting. We have a criminal justice system. In Baltimore, Sean, the 3 police officers that were acquitted by an extraordinarily courageous African-American judge.
All 6 of them now have been, the charges are dropped.
The shooting that I had that was the most ambiguous, the police officers were acquitted by a jury, including 4 African-Americans. So we have to educate people to understand that our criminal justice system is a fair system. And the fact that there may be more blacks in it in certain communities than whites is merely a function of the fact that right now, as we're speaking here tonight, 2 to 3 blacks will be shot in Chicago. And nobody will pay attention.
And nobody will talk about it.
The average is 2 a night.
Since Obama's been president.
2 every night. And none of these people protesting give a damn about those black lives. I had to care about those black lives, and I saved somewhere between 7,000 and 8,000 of them. There's no mayor in the history of New York City that saved more black lives than I did, because I cared about the ones that they don't pay attention to.
Over 3,000 citizens of Chicago shot this year, and since Obama's been president, 3,000.
No protest in Chicago about the terrible schools in Chicago, about the lack of jobs in Chicago, about the lack of opportunity in Chicago, about the fact that Chicago's been run by Democratic rule for 50 years that has deteriorated the city. We could substitute Detroit for that. We could substitute any other city you want for that. You don't provide good schools because you're afraid to stand up to the teachers union, and then you have children who are poorly educated. You don't provide jobs because you drive the jobs out of your city because there's so much crime. You don't provide jobs for your people. And then they become frustrated, they become angry, and they look for scapegoats. Now, the African-American politicians, most of them, and the agitators don't want to say that, because the teachers union owns them.
You know, there's something, though, Mr. Mayor, very profound here that we have to address, and that is a president that has been so quick to rush to judgment in cases where he has been proven wrong, in Cambridge, in Ferguson, in Baltimore, in Florida, Trayvon Martin. Now, and he doesn't even talk about 3,660. Am I looking at that right? Is that a fire? It looks like there's a fire out there. Mr. Mayor, hang on 1 second if I can. If I can put you on hold for 1 second. Let me go to Steve Harrigan. He's down on the ground. Maybe he can give us some insight. There is definitely a fire there as we're looking now. Steve, I understand you're actually with the protesters. Tell us what's going on.
That's right. John, you can see the police about 50 yards in front of us with riot shields. They're saying anyone who is still here is going to get arrested. I want to know why you're still here.
We're still here because of the fact is that police do not understand yet to this day that people, they have to stand up for what they believe in. You guys are out here, media, press, and everyone else is out here because you believe in a story. We believe in the fact that this is unjust. We believe in the fact that this is wrong. We also believe that they're about to run up on us and do some danger. So therefore, I will tell you this, I have done no wrong, I will not do no wrong, and the only thing I will stand for is justice among our people. That means black, brown, white, or whatever it is. Charlotte, North Carolina has been built on minorities and everyone else. Please understand that.
Let me ask you what happened. Let me ask you one thing that happened up there. One young man shot very close to death up there. Do you know what happened? Do you know who's responsible for it?
Mecklenburg County is the reason why, because no one else has guns, dude. I mean, none of us have guns. The largest weapon we have is a camera phone. And that's the largest weapon that we have, is a camera phone and knowledge, and knowledge of self.
Hey, Steve, let me ask this guy a question.
Friend, is the biggest weapon you could possibly ever have. 704, Charlotte, North Carolina, and surrounding has been built on minorities, whether it's banking, whether it's money or anything else. And if we were to take away the money and start putting it within our own companies, within our own groups, there would be a problem, and that whole number 2, number 3 would drop to 10.
Let me ask you, when the police do fire tear gas, what actions are you going to take? We've seen people throw bottles at police, throw rocks back. What's going to happen when tear gas is fired?
The bad part is they've thrown tear gas. You know what else they've thrown? They've thrown bullets. They've also thrown hatred. They've also thrown racism. They've thrown multiple.
Go ahead, Sean.
Hey, Steve, I want you to ask this guy a question because I'm paying very close attention to everything that he's saying. The police have a very different version. Now, either this man is right and this kid was carrying a book, this man was carrying a book, or the police are right and the man was carrying a gun. So the question is, why can't he wait until all the evidence is presented before he rushes to judgment?
Now, the original spark that set this all off, the shooting of the man, do you know why that happened? Why the police shot the man? What is your version of events?
From what I understand, they thought and they felt a threat being by this young man. And I say young man because he was only 43, 45 years young. He was a young man. He had family. He had kids.
Did he have a gun or did he have a book? Which version is true?
Understanding, he had both. It seems like, because the way that you guys cross it up, he has a gun and now we're dealing with the problem. This is what happens when you bully.
But wait a minute. Why does he rush? Steve, the question is, why is he rushing to judgment before we know the facts in the case? The police said he had a gun, and the resident said he had a book. Why do people rush to judgment? Why can't they wait for all the evidence in?
There's not a lot of patience here right now, Sean. That man has moved back into the crowd.
Okay.
As this police line has moved forward, threatening arrest and threatening more tear gas, a lot of people have run backwards. So the police now have moved forward about 600 yards over the course of an hour as they slowly try to regain control here.
Steve, let me ask you this. You know, a lot of these incidents, we've seen that professional agitators, people bust in from outside communities who know nothing about the community. Have you gotten any indication, in fact, that's happened? And do you know what's happened? It looks like there's a reporter that's down in the white shirt there.
Whoa.
Are people... What happened, Steve-O?
So what we're seeing now are what looks like paintball shots being fired, exploding on the ground to try and drive some protesters back, and bottles being hurled at the police. So a real back and forth here. The police in this line have shown tremendous patience. They've been pelted with bottles. They've had fireworks shot at them, and they're just basically holding their ground.
What was that
a
bang we just heard?
Explosion. We've seen some... That was a flashbang explosion and some fireworks to try and drive people back.
Okay, and who started that fire in the middle of the street?
Used to all of this, and it's having less and less effect as time goes on.
And do you know who started the fire that's in the street?
Your question about the makeup of this crowd is interesting, because it's kind of sad how this thing has evolved over the last couple hours. Because early on, when it was still light out, you saw a lot of parents with
all right,
children.
Here we go. There's tear gas.
I don't know what that was, but it came from the direction of the protesters. Now, those are designed to intimidate and designed to frighten, and they're very effective. They're flashbang grenades, and they make people scream and
we just saw one go off right now.
That's what's happened.
Are you okay?
That's more tear gas as well. There's a slight breeze out, which has made the tear gas a little less effective than it ordinarily would be.
All right, Steve, stay right there. If I can, I want to go back to former New York City Mayor Rudy Giuliani, who's on the phone with us. Is he gone? Is Ben Carson there?
I'm here, Sean.
Okay. Fox News senior correspondent Geraldo Rivera is with us. He's been in many of these situations himself. Darryl Parks, who represented the Trayvon Martin family, is with us as well. Geraldo, you've been in many of these situations. You see what's going on. Looks like the police now are trying to take the remaining protesters, although looks like a bottle was just hurled at them. And they're using the flashbang and some tear gas to push the crowd back. You've been there many times yourself. It seems to me like they're showing a lot of restraint. That's my opinion.
The cops are doing a great job in Charlotte, but you're in the fourth hour now, Sean, of the second day of the rioting there in Charlotte. By this time, the people who are on the street are the pros. The vast majority of them, I would think, would be the people who are professional agitators, people who really have, the ability to flock to these combat zones and to add their 2 cents. That happened in Ferguson. That happens time and time again. Happened in Baltimore. But the bigger picture, and listening to Mayor Giuliani and you speaking, Sean, and hearing Donald Trump's suggestion of a national stop and frisk, I think that we have to recognize that too many black men are being killed in questionable circumstances in confrontations with cops. There's a lot of other things going on. Obviously, the big question of black-on-black violence and the need for more cops in places like Chicago and so forth. We get the big picture that there are really, the fact that the African-American inner-city community has fared so poorly in the last 8-10 years. I mean, that's real, but we have to concede.
But we
hear it every 2 days now, Sean. We have to concede that too many unarmed black men. If this guy was this fellow was
let me stop you and let me gently disagree with you. I mean, look, as I've been pointing out, and as Newt Gingrich pointed out, as Rudy Giuliani pointed out here tonight, there's been 3,000 people shot in Chicago this year. There's been 3,660 murders in the city of Chicago since Obama's been president. Geraldo, I defy you to name one of those people that are dead. And I bet you can't. And here's the problem, is you've got a president of the United States that rushes to judgment, high-profile cases, and he ends up being wrong, creating an expectation within the community of a certain outcome and result, and then people feel betrayed and disappointed because their leaders told them something by rushing to judgment before facts are presented.
Sean, the story is so clear from your perspective. You see it, you analyze it, you know exactly what the problem is, and yet you have conceded, and I've heard you speaking with Steve Harrigan earlier, that there are two different realities, at least two different realities. The people who are protesting earlier today.
That's my point. Why don't we wait for the facts?
Oh, yes.
Why don't we wait for the facts? Why are we always rushing to judgment?
You have an emotional volcano